We have a very special episode for you tonight about the things that can influence our desire for food with weight expert Dr. David Macklin. Before we get started, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and let us know if it's your first time joining us. So Dr. Macklin, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Oh, you're very welcome.
So a lot of people have told us that there are certain situations or people or places that are really challenging for them when it comes to cravings. So how do you suggest people deal with kind of those high-risk times?
Tell me more. What are you hearing from individuals? How do they describe it? What are their words?
Okay, so number one most common challenge that I think people experience is it's 8 o'clock, I've eaten dinner, I'm sitting in front of the TV, and all I can think about is a specific snack.
So they're sitting in front of a certain place at a certain time with a certain person or absence of others around them, and they're describing that they're thinking about food.
Exactly.
Right? So they might be surprised to learn, you might be surprised to learn that what they're describing is the central symptom of struggling with weight. The main symptom that we treat in obesity medicine takes place in the subconscious recesses of someone's brain. But that's what they're describing. So the question would be, how many times has that happened? What do I mean by that? Is that how many times has couch, TV, end of day been paired or associated with some what we call a reward value food? Reward value foods are tasty foods or calorie dense foods, foods that are filled with energy, sugar, fat, and salt. It just turns out our brains are very good at picking up when we're eating the good stuff. This stuff was important for evolutionary purposes. This is quick energy, this is dense energy. This is going to help us survive to pass on our genes kind of food. Those foods, when we eat them, eventually a programming takes place. If you think of your day as a timeline, right, from when you wake until you go to sleep, like the timeline of your day, the question would be, do you notice any times or settings or places within the timeline where you would consider yourself to be, say, just on average at higher risk of extra calories or less controlled eating or less healthy eating?
Definitely.
Oh, so what would stand out for you?
After lunch, like around 2 o'clock, I'm tired, like I'm fatigued. I don't really want to go back to work, and all I can think of is wanting chocolate.
2 o'clock, you're working.
No, I've eaten lunch. I'm getting ready to go back to work, and I just, all I can think about is chocolate.
Oh, so where are you at that point?
Usually I'm sitting at the kitchen table.
So kitchen table in your home, having eaten lunch, the time is around,
Call it 1:30 or 2.
and you're about to go back to work, and you're describing something happens to you. Your attention is drawn towards
Chocolate.
how many times has that happened? How many times have you found yourself in a kind of post-lunch, just going back to work, and pairing that set of cues with something tasty like a reward value food like chocolate? How many times in your life has that happened?
Oh, hundreds, if not thousands.
Going back how many years?
Oh gosh, probably 20, call it.
So thousands and thousands and thousands of times you've paired that set of cues with a reward value food. And so the answer to why, right? Why is my attention being drawn to food? Why am I thinking about chocolate? The settings, and we've described kind of you, lunch, home, 12:30, 1:30, going back to work. That set of cues has been paired so many times with something that your brain values that a conditioning is taking place, such that eventually the set of cues themselves generate what we call, again, the main symptom of struggling with weight, which is wanting. Desire, urge, craving, your attention is drawn to that. Again, we survived because our brains could motivate us subconsciously. But here's the catch. The catch is it's a subconscious drive, so you could miss it. What would I leave with you as homework if this was a clinical discussion right now? The homework I would leave with you is not to necessarily change your behavior, not to necessarily not have chocolate. That might be part of the long game, or maybe not. You might value chocolate at that time. It's actually none of my business. But what I would leave with you as homework is to just study this phenomena, right? You see the challenge. I'd be like, would you consider finding yourself in this set of circumstances and cues and setting, and simply stop and notice it? Take a couple minutes and say, oh, look at your watch, look around you, look at your kitchen, and say, oh man, I'm Pavlov's dog. Like, am I hungry? No. But here I am in this setting, and I'm thinking about food. And I've done this thousands of times. Why this is, so yeah, I'd leave that with you as homework, to just sit, stop, Notice, remember we were talking about how the symptoms that individuals struggle with in weight management are in the recesses of their subconscious brain. And that's why I'm asking you to stop and notice it, because otherwise you'll miss it, right? So just kind of go, oh, take 2 minutes or 3 minutes. And go ahead with the behavior if you wish, but notice this subconscious drive and attention towards food. And that in itself will give you an edge in being able to manage this eventually.
We're going to pause here and do our trivia question. Folks, if you answer our question tonight, you'll get an awesome 7-day exercise guide that can help anyone get moving. All you have to do is answer our trivia question, which is, true or false? According to the current physical activity guidelines, it's recommended to get 150 minutes of moderate exercise per week. Is that true or false? Put your best guess in the comments and you will get that guide delivered to your Facebook Messenger inbox. And folks, if you can think of any friends or family members who might find this show helpful, please tag them in the comments so they can tune in too. So we've talked about wanting, which is kind of that drive for tasty food. How do obesity treatments like medications or surgery affect wanting?
Fascinatingly, if obesity treatment is successful, remember I mentioned 3 pillars, behavioral, medical, and surgical. If any of those pillars are successful, it's specifically because they are dampening wanting. It's a hallmark of successful obesity management that the treatment is dampening the main symptom. It's kind of an interesting question, right? So if we treat asthma with medication, we're treating wheezing and coughing and shortness of breath. If we're treating osteoarthritis with medication, we're treating joint swelling, pain, and disability. So if we're treating obesity with medication or surgery, what symptom are we treating?
We're treating the desire for food or the drive.
The drive, the motivation, the desire to food, and the hallmark of successful and effective obesity treatment in 2024 is that it acts by dampening or managing wanting. So why is that so important? The hallmark of obesity and the real medical condition of obesity is that the brain is expert at defending against fat loss. And it does this by increasing wanting. So now we've talked about the main symptom, and it gets worse because if someone is successful at losing weight, as they lose weight, the brain is expert at recognizing fat loss and fighting against it with primarily increased appetite, also decreased metabolic rate, but that's the lesser of the changes. Why is our brain defending against fat loss? It's defending against fat loss because if our ancestors lost 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12% of their body weight, it was never good news, right? It was because the food supply was interrupted, or illness even more commonly. And if they're going to survive to pass on their genes, that fat loss needs to be defended against. How? By motivating that and making them think about having on their mind food. So what you describe as a setting that's high risk, for example, in the early afternoon, if you were successful at losing weight, that would only get stronger. And now we understand what treatment does. Treatment, let's use medication as an example. Anti-obesity medications exist on this planet because the brain defends against fat loss with increased appetite, and medication defends you against that increased appetite. People are like, well, what do medications do? What do these anti-obesity medications do? They defend you against your brain's efforts to get you back up primarily through increased appetite, increased wanting. People say, well, how long do I need to be on an anti-obesity medication? This is a chronic disease. We have because people say, well, certainly at some point, the brain's going to stop defending against fat loss because there I am, I'll be at a healthier weight, I'm healthier. Why wouldn't my brain become more satisfied and say, hey, okay, fine, you're down here, 20% lighter, you're healthier, we'll keep you here. We have absolutely no evidence to that effect. And we see instead a persistent response to fat loss of increased appetite. And that's why treatment is chronic, whether it's surgery or medical treatment or even subtle and ongoing longitudinal elements of behavioral therapy. So therapy is longitudinal for chronic diseases.
So we've talked about wanting, the drive to food. Let's talk about restraint and how we build the muscle of restraint.
Well, so we're talking about a subconscious reflexive brain event that's motivating us to go and get food. So the question, the phrase restraint, cognitive restraint is really the classic phrase in our literature. Cognitive means our thinking. So cognitive restraint means changing our thinking in moments of wanting. We've talked in the past about how humans are automatic thinkers. right? We have automatic thoughts come to our brain all the time. There's another brain event that comes at the same time that we experience motivation to food. And what we experience second, or as a partner to wanting, is what we call automatic cognitions, automatic thoughts that come to our brain that will give reason and logic and justification as to why we should turn to food in that moment. So not only will we be wanting food, but our brain will also be giving reason and logic through thinking, automatic thoughts, as to why we should be going to get food. And so people will recognize this. It's been, I'm so tired and I got to go back to work. This will give me a boost of energy. I worked so hard today that, you know what, this will be just a nice reward for me to go back to work with. You know what, I hardly ate much lunch and it was a healthy lunch, so a little bits of chocolate, that sure won't kill me. Or you know what, I've been really off track lately anyway, so what difference does it make? Or you know what, I'll just do this today and tomorrow I won't have chocolate just to balance it off because I don't want to have too much of that. These would all be actually, I don't know, I'm just making those up.
No, it's like you're in my head. I've experienced every single one of those thoughts.
So what if, right? What if these are automatic thoughts that come to you in these moments of wanting? And what if I was to leave you a second piece of homework then? What if I was to leave you the homework of also not only just characterizing or qualifying this reflexive brain event called wanting, attention, bias, desire that happens to you after lunch, but also to stop and notice, what automatic thoughts come to me in these moments when I am wanting chocolate after lunch before I go back to work? And then you'll start to notice these automatic thoughts. Why is that important? Because that's the beginning of what we call restraint skill development. If we talk about kind of definitions of behavior change, one of the key definitions of behavior change is changes in our thinking. So sustained behavior change means that the person is now, same person, same set of circumstances, you after lunch kitchen, but now they used to think one way and now they're thinking another way. So they've changed their thinking. That's actually the definition of behavior change. So if you can understand wanting and characterize the automatic thoughts that are coming to you, now you can start with the work of potentially changing those lines of thinking. So what if in the example we gave, you're stopping, or anyone would stop and pause and say, well, is this really aligned with my values? Is this in the direction of what's most important to me? Do I really need this? And even challenge the automatic thoughts. Will this give me more energy? Does it give me more energy? Just because I ate healthily, is that actually a justification as to eat something that might be less in the direction of what I value and less in the direction of managing my weight? And just because I would do this now and plan to not do it tomorrow, I've often said I won't do it tomorrow, and then I've done it still. So now the person's stopping, pausing, thinking, considering, is this aligned with my values? Are the automatic thoughts that are coming actually true? Is that even relevant to think this way? So we now have a space to stop and pause. Interesting sidecar. Someone who is enjoying the benefits of effective second-generation anti-obesity medication would say, in those moments, I have tons more space to stop, to pause, to think, because the symptom that's being dampened is wanting. The drive and motivation is less strong. So the individual will describe, you know what, I just have more time to kind of stop, to pause, to think. I just have more space. So an event that previously was what we call a behavioral loop, wanting triggered reflexively, followed by automatic thoughts that give justification and rationalization, followed by the behavioral loop. Now the change is the same person in the same setting. Sure, they're experiencing wanting, maybe dampened by an anti-obesity medication, and they're able to stop and pause and recognize the old thoughts and change their thinking and potentially change their behavior and maybe not align with the behavior that's not in the direction of what's most important to them, to the motivation that they have to get to a healthier place.
So in my chocolate after lunch example, what I hear you saying is, I have the craving towards chocolate, which I really don't have any control over. The automatic thoughts arise, as they inevitably do. I really need a treat. This will give me some energy. I need to just pause to the best degree I can and start questioning those thoughts. That's really kind of the pattern interrupt I'm looking for.
Actually, even going back one step, wait, this is wanting. Wait, oh, right. Kitchen island, 1 o'clock, no one around, just going to work. This has happened thousands of times. I know what this is. This is that reflexive neurological event called wanting. This is the main symptom I struggle with when I struggle with obesity, someone can say to themselves. Then the next level is, and these automatic thoughts are the ones that come automatically, and they're not necessarily true. They might be the opposite of the truth. And just like you said, starting to recognize what the old thoughts were and creating new thoughts that are more in the direction of what you most value and the direction of your best health and your best weight.
So my new thoughts might be something like, will this really give me energy? I had chocolate yesterday. Maybe I don't need a treat today. I've said this before. Those kind of thoughts that can kind of begin to challenge and replace the original ones.
It's the hallmark of successful weight management is people will think differently in those moments. It's exactly the change that we see in someone who has successfully managed their weight. You know what? I don't need this. I know what this is. This is wanting. I'm going to actually build my muscle, as you started earlier today discussing. I'm going to build my restraint muscle because I don't need this and I won't feel better. And in fact, it's not in the direction of what I most value and what's important to me. Sometimes I'll have chocolate, but this one isn't important to me. I'm going to move on.
So I want to circle back to what you said, which you said, thinking is the beginning of behavior change. And I think many of us think, no, the behavior is the behavior change, not really recognizing the role that our thoughts play in the actions that we take.
It's actually a shout out to behavioral therapy, right? People can go on a diet. They'll be told, eat less, move more, cut out carbs, just do this, do ketogenic this or intermittent this. So they'll be told to just change their behavior with no recognition of the underlying force that's actually responsible for creating sustained behavior change, which is changes in their thinking. The thinking would be as unsophisticated as, oh, it's 9 p.m., I can't eat after 8 p.m., and therefore I can't eat this. We'd call that an unsophisticated change in thinking that doesn't really have legs, as opposed to, well, wait, I know what this is wanting, and these automatic thoughts are not actually aligned with the direction I want to be going. I know this is a key part of my work going forward is managing this time of the day. This is the main symptom that I struggle with. This is where behavioral therapy and medical therapy are helping me. It's a completely, different line of thinking. And yes, changes in thinking are the foundation of sustained behavior change. Just behavior change is most likely to be unsustained.
In case you're just joining us, we're here with Dr. David Macklin talking about the things that can influence our desire for food, and we're giving away a wonderful 7-day exercise guide if you answer our trivia question, which is, true or false, according to the current physical activity guidelines, it's recommended to get 150 minutes of moderate exercise per week. Is that true or false? Put your best guess in the comments, and you'll get that guide delivered to your Facebook Messenger inbox. Folks, we do this show every month, and we want to make sure you never miss an episode. Text the word WATCH to 844-966-1957, and we'll send a short text message reminding you when we go live each month. Can CBT help other obesity treatments like medications or bariatric surgery be more effective?
Right. So the question is, could CBT help medication become more effective or surgery become more effective? It's actually upside down, right? The treatments of both medication or surgery can help CBT become more effective. So there's 3 layers to the human appetite system. The top layer is called the executive system. That's the only part of the brain that you and I have access to. Right? Today, in our conversations or conversations that I have with patients, the only part of their brain that I can access in conversation is the executive system, the top of the 3 layers. But a majority of our weight is regulated in the bottom 2 layers, the middle layer being the motivation system or hedonic system where wanting comes from, the main symptom of obesity, and the homeostatic system at the bottom, which is where fat loss is recognized. Remember, I mentioned that fat loss is recognized expertly by our brain and fought against with increased appetite. That starts at the underneath lowest homeostatic system. And so the top layer we have access to, but the bottom 2 layers we don't have access to. So how do we access the homeostatic system? How do we access the motivation hedonic system? That's actually where medication and surgery act. That's the role of these two treatments is they access the bottom parts of the brain that you and I simply don't have access to. So really you can think of it as a bottom-up treatment, whether it's surgery or medication, and a top-down treatment, which would be CBT, addressing the executive system. And the executive system is much easier to operate when the bottom parts are being managed. If you've lost 20 or 30 pounds and you don't have any other help against the biology of the two under systems, the lower systems, then it becomes very difficult to stop and pause and think and change my thinking. No, the wanting is like a 9 out of 10. Instead, if medication or surgery are successful and they're dampening wanting, the patients will always say, well, I have more space, I have more time. So now the ability to change our thinking is enhanced by a more comprehensive treatment from the bottom up. And so surgery and medication can support advances in CBT and more ability in a patient to be able to change their thinking, which again is the foundation of sustained behavior change.
So as you're speaking, I'm thinking about medications, and I'm thinking almost all medications operate below our level of conscious control, whether it's diabetes or high cholesterol or blood pressure. They're all doing things in our body that we can't will ourselves to do otherwise. So obesity is really not any different than any other chronic condition.
Right, and then put yourself in the unfortunate position of a patient who's been the object of stigma and bias because they've walked into maybe a healthcare practitioner's office or maybe their family dinner table and they're being told to just eat less and move more. Right? ELMM, we call that the nightmare on Elm Street. Right? It's bias and stigma. It's the equivalent of saying to someone with depression, well, why don't you just cheer up and snap out of it? Or someone with asthma, why don't you just breathe deeper and cough less? And so I like how you say that, right? So these lower parts of the brain, whether it's, why is your systolic blood pressure 160? Can you just bring that down and come back to my office in a week? That's unacceptable. I'd invite you to bring your systolic blood pressure down. Oh, okay. But like you're saying, but wait, that's taking place in subconscious recesses of my brain, homeostatic, lowest parts of my brain. And so, yeah, medication treats from underneath. Behavioral therapy treats from top down. And ideally, together, we find that that's the most effective way to treat this condition of obesity.
So we're going to talk about the modulators that can increase wanting and decrease restraint. The first one is stress. How can stress make it more difficult to lose weight and keep it off?
Yeah, we've talked about the main skill of obesity management is being in moments of decisions around food and stopping and pausing and thinking, which surgery and medication can help with, create more space. And so, yes, if you're stressed, you've got less capacity to stop and pause and think. The medical condition ADHD would also fit into the same concept. ADHD, more from the top down, self-regulation is called an executive function. ADHD is a disease of poor executive function. And so this is why you'll see individuals living with ADHD, more from the top down, having difficulty stopping, pausing, thinking, and changing their thinking in moments of wanting. It's why there's a stronger association. This is another one of the modulators that we will see. Sleep is also considered a modulator of our appetite system. If you're tired, one of the classic phrases we use for tired is sleep debt, right? If people are not sleeping enough, think sleep apnea, think insomnia. If people are not sleeping enough, if people are in sleep debt, guess what happens physiologically and neurologically? Exactly what you would not want to happen. Same idea as stress. In fact, the physiology is very similar to the stress response. Again, it's not in everyone, but in those who are vulnerable to this, fatigue or sleep debt will increase the strength of wanting. It'll be of a stronger amplitude and decrease our executive self-regulation skills. Again, if you're really tired, you're much less likely to be, oh, okay, hold on, let me think about this. Do I really need this? Is this aligned with my values? How will I feel afterwards? Won't I feel better if I do? Right? You're tired and you've got less top-down executive self-regulation skills. So what we're starting to see is a set of what we call modulators. So the expert obesity clinician is not only treating wanting with either behavioral therapy, medical therapy, or surgical therapy, and helping individuals change their thinking around their food decisions, but they also have this sidecar job, which is to check, are there external causes, which are actually internal states, such as sleep debt, such as stress, such as a condition like ADHD? Are there these conditions that are modulating the appetite system in the opposite direction and making it more difficult for a patient to lose weight and keep it off? Another modulator I would put into that group is depression. Again, not everyone. It just turns out there's a percentage of people that if they're living with depression, that will result or be associated with increased appetite. There's a bunch of people who, if they're living with symptoms of depression, will have decreased appetite and lose weight. So again, it's a phenotype. It's a group of people who are vulnerable to obesity and are living with depression. We call depression bidirectional. If you're living with depression, you're on average at a higher risk of living with obesity. And if you're living with obesity, you're on average at a higher risk of living with depression. It goes in both ways. But again, another example of the expert obesity clinician will say, well, wait a second. Yes, there's the appetite system and wanting and executive self-regulation skills, and we can work on that. But are there, in this case, modulators such as sleep debt, stress, and mood, both ADHD and depression, which are making things more difficult? So the expert clinician will say, well, can we manage these? Can we manage stress or sleep? Can we help the person with insomnia? Can we help the person with sleep apnea? Can we help the person with mood to down-regulate these modulators that are making things more difficult?
Well, I feel like you're sort of really speaking to why seeing a physician for weight management is so important, because obviously those are not things that we have any conscious control over. And seeing someone who can kind of walk through what may be affecting our appetite system is really only possible in a medical setting.
If I can be blunt and honest, it's kind of a scary prospect to me that slightly keeps me up at night and gives me sleep debt to think of people addressing their weight and obesity in a DIY fashion, right? In a do-it-yourself fashion, maybe just picking up an anti-obesity medication and getting it from a physician and going out there on their own. They're going to be subject to internalized weight bias and not understand that obesity is a real disease. As weight loss slows and pulls in somewhere, they won't understand that that's a natural consequence of the brain's defense against fat loss, and that the medication is supporting them in these lower weights, and that by coming off the medication, they'll be subject to their brain's increased appetite and be likely to regain weight. A patient on a DIY path will not understand the symptom that the medication is treating.
It's so funny, you're speaking about DIY, weight management, and I think we would never think about doing DIY chemotherapy. And yet, the support that's needed for someone undergoing obesity treatment is very similar. There really is the need for several different healthcare professionals working with someone, explaining what to expect, walking them through inevitable setbacks. It's just another example of weight bias, isn't it?
It's exactly an example of weight bias, because if inside the mind of the individual struggling with weight are thoughts of, this isn't that difficult, I really should be able to do this, it's really just eat less, move more, the past failures are just because I wasn't motivated enough, and so if I double down my effort, I should be able to do it on my own. And there's the origins of the DIY effort, which will be, unfortunately, much less likely to result in all the quality of life and health benefits that that individual deserves.
Dr. Macklin, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And a big thank you to everyone watching at home. We so appreciate you being here and chatting with us in the comments. Before we go, here's the answer to our trivia question. True or false, according to the current physical activity guidelines, it's recommended to get 158 minutes of moderate exercise per week. The answer is true. If you didn't get to answer the trivia question, but you'd still like that 7-day exercise guide, just leave a comment for us and tell us what you thought of the show. We will be back to you with a new episode in a few weeks. Until then, please stay safe and take good care. Good night.